It was my 48th birthday, and the fancy restaurant my parents insisted on felt more like a courtroom than a celebration. The moment I sat down, the knives came out. Not the silver ones, but the words. My own mother smirked. "Still renting at your age, Emily. When are you finally going to stop being such a disappointment?" Dad sighed dramatically. My brother Joe raised his glass, laughing. To the family charity case, every insult landed like a slap. I smiled weakly, the same way I had for 30 years, because that's what good daughters do. Then the door opened. Grandpa, 82 years old, frail, supposedly tucked away in a nursing home, walked in alone, clutching an old leather briefcase like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The entire table froze. Mom's wine glass trembled. Dad turned the color of ash. Joe's smug grin vanished. Grandpa didn't sit. He looked straight at me and said, calm as death, "Emily, did you know I put $5 million in trust for you the day you turned 18? I laughed because I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. He slammed the briefcase onto the table. Papers spilled everywhere, 30 years of bank records, forged signatures, secret transfers, all leading to the three people sitting across from me. Their faces went white. The restaurant went dead silent. Grandpa's voice cut through the air. Tonight the stealing stops, and the truth begins. What you're about to watch is the most shocking family betrayal I've ever lived through, complete with secret sisters destroyed, wills, dangerous debts, and the sweetest revenge you'll ever see. Stay until the end, because the final twist at the lake house will leave you speechless. My name is Emily Harper. I'm 48 years old, a third-grade teacher at Jefferson Elementary, in the same small Ohio town where I grew up. And for the last 12 years, I've been a single mom to my daughter Lauren, who's now 23, and finishing college on scholarships. I worked 2 jobs to help pay for. After my divorce, I learned to live on very little, a 2-bedroom rental on Maple Street, a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked dashboard, and a savings account that never quite reaches 4 figures. I've never minded. I have my students, my daughter's Sunday mornings at church, and the quiet belief that doing the right thing eventually matters. That's who I was when I walked into Salvatore's Italian Bistro on the evening of my 48th birthday, wearing the only nice dress I own, and carrying a heart full of cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, this year my family would be kind. They weren't. Mom had chosen the restaurant, the most expensive place within 30 miles, and insisted on paying, which should have been my first warning. The moment I reached the table, she looked me up and down like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "Still that same navy dress, Emily. You've had it since Lauren's high school graduation." Dad gave the weary headshake I've seen 1,000 times, the one that says, "I'm the family disappointment in human form." Joe, 45, twice divorced and convinced he's the next Warren Buffett, was already halfway through a bottle of red and grinning like a shark. "Happy birthday, big sis," he said, raising his glass. To the queen of coupon clipping, Mom laughed too loudly. Heads turned from nearby tables. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I smiled the way I smile when a parent yells at me in conferences, polite, steady, unbreakable. The waiter brought bread. I focused on tearing off tiny pieces so my hands would have something to do. Joe launched into his latest triumph. Another real estate flip. Another 6-figure profit. Another leased Mercedes gleaming in the parking lot. "You should see the leather seats, Em. Heated and cooled. Imagine that air conditioning for your backside." He winked at Dad. "Maybe one day you'll ride in a car that doesn't smell like spilled juice boxes and broken dreams." Dad sighed theatrically. 48 years old, still renting that little place on Maple. When are you finally going to make something of yourself, Emily? Your mother and I won't be around forever to pick up the pieces. Pick up the pieces. As if they'd ever picked up anything except the check when it made them look generous in front of their friends. I opened my mouth to say thank you for dinner, to change the subject. Anything to keep the peace, but Mom cut me off. "Really, honey, it's embarrassing. My bridge club asks about you, and I have to make excuses. Oh, Emily's very dedicated to her teaching." I say, but we all know teachers don't exactly get rich. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin, the picture of concern. At your age, I thought you'd at least own a home by now. A little security. Something to show for all those years. Joe leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Tell them about the IRS letters M. Those are always entertaining. I felt the familiar twist in my stomach. The letters I kept getting, the ones I didn't understand, the credit score that had plummeted for reasons no one could explain. I'd asked Joe for help once, he's the money guy in the family, and he'd patted my hand and told me not to worry my pretty little head about it. I laughed, a brittle sound that hurt coming out. It's fine. Just some paperwork mix-ups. Mix-ups, Joe repeated, savoring the word. Sure. That's one way to put it. The waiter came back to take our orders. I asked for the chicken parmigiana because it was the cheapest thing on the menu. Mom rolled her eyes. Live a little, Emily. It's your birthday. So I changed it to the salmon. $32 I couldn't afford, but I told myself it was only once a year. The food arrived. Conversation circled back to Joe's new boat, Mom's upcoming cruise, Dad's golf membership. Every sentence carried the same unspoken message. Look how far we've come. Look how far you haven't. I kept nodding, smiling, cutting my salmon into smaller and smaller pieces, praying the evening would end before I started crying into the mashed potatoes. I glanced at my watch. 8:15. 2 more hours, maybe less if I could invent a headache. I could do this. I'd survived worse birthdays. I'd survived everything they'd thrown at me for decades. Just keep smiling, Emily. Just keep. The front door of the restaurant opened with a soft chime. I turned, more out of reflex than curiosity, expecting another couple, maybe someone late for their reservation. Instead, leaning heavily on a cane and moving with the slow determination of a man who had no business being out of bed, let alone out of the nursing home 30 miles away, was my grandfather. He was supposed to be asleep by now, medicated and watched by nurses. He hadn't left Sunny Acres alone in 3 years. Yet there he stood in his old Sunday suit, clutching a battered leather briefcase against his chest like it held the secrets of the world. Every head at our table swiveled. Mom's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Dad's face drained of color. Joe's smirk evaporated. Grandpa's pale blue eyes found mine across the room. And then, in a voice that carried through the entire restaurant, clear and steady and utterly terrifying, he said my name. The restaurant door swung open, and Grandpa walked in uninvited. The chime from the door hadn't even finished echoing when I recognized the slow, deliberate tap of Grandpa's cane on the hardwood floor. I had heard that rhythm every Sunday of my childhood, back when he still lived in the big house by the lake, and I would run to meet him on the porch. But that was decades ago. These days, the sound only reached me through the phone when the nurses at Sunny Acres held their cell up to his ear so he could wish me happy birthday in a voice thin as paper. Yet there he was, 82 years old, stooped and trembling, crossing the restaurant as though the distance were measured in miles instead of yards. His gray suit hung loose on his narrow shoulders, the same suit he'd worn to my mother's funeral all those years ago. And beneath the open collar, something glinted, a delicate gold chain with a small oval locket, the one my real mother used to wear every single day until the cancer took her. I hadn't seen that necklace since I was 4. Mom, my stepmother, had told me it was lost in the move after the funeral. She'd said it with that tight little smile that always meant the subject was closed forever. Grandpa's knuckles were white around the handle of an ancient brown leather briefcase, the kind lawyers carried in old movies, edges cracked and corners scuffed from years of honest use. He held it against his chest like a shield, or maybe like a bomb he was about to set down in the middle of our table. The hostess started toward him, concerned, ready to offer an arm, but he waved her off with surprising strength and kept walking, eyes fixed on our corner booth. The air changed. I felt it first in my lungs, like someone had opened a freezer door. My stepmother's wine glass stopped an inch from her lips and began to shake. Tiny red ripples spread across the surface, betraying the tremor in her hand. Dad stared at his plate as if the fettuccine might offer him protection. Joe's mouth hung open mid-sentence, the punchline of whatever brag he'd been building dying unspoken. The restaurant noise faded into a distant hum, the way sound disappears underwater. I couldn't move. My heart was suddenly too large for my ribcage. Grandpa had never left Sunny Acres without a nurse, not once in the 3 years since his heart surgery. The staff had strict orders, no outings unless a family member signed him out, and none of us had. I'd visited him just last Sunday, wheeling him to the garden so he could watch the sparrows. He'd been drowsy, confused about what year it was, asking for my mother by her childhood nickname. I'd kissed his forehead and promised to bring Lauren next time. He'd smiled, patted my hand, and fallen asleep before I reached the door. So how was he here now, alone at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, 30 miles from the nursing home, carrying that briefcase like it contained the weight of every secret our family had ever buried? He reached the edge of our table and stopped. The overhead light caught the locket and threw a small golden reflection across his lined face. For a moment, he looked almost young again, the way he did in the photographs beside my real mother's lake house piano. Tall and strong and unafraid. Then the moment passed, and he was simply old, terribly old, but his eyes burned with something fierce and clear. My stepmother found her voice first thin and too bright. "Dad, what on earth, you'll catch your death. How did you even get here?" She half rose the way people do when they want to look helpful, while actually trying to herd someone back where they belong. Grandpa ignored her completely. He didn't look at Dad, didn't glance at Joe. His gaze moved across the table and settled on me alone. Steady, unwavering the way it used to when he taught me to bait a hook, or promised that everything would be all right, even after Mommy went to heaven. I felt my stomach drop, a sick, slow-motion plunge, the same sensation I'd had the day the principal called me in to say my husband was leaving and taking everything that wasn't nailed down. Only this felt bigger. This felt like the floor had disappeared entirely, and I was falling through every year I'd spent trying to be good enough, quiet enough, grateful enough. Because Grandpa wasn't supposed to be here, and whatever was in that briefcase had brought him. He shifted the weight of it in his arms, and the brass clasps gleamed dully under the restaurant lights. I could see the veins standing out on the back of his hands, could see the effort it took just to keep standing. But his chin was high, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the same calm authority it had the day he walked me down the aisle when my own father refused. He looked straight into my eyes, and the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath with me. "Emily," he said softly, gently, "the way you speak to someone you love right before you change their life forever tonight, you finally learn the truth." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and for one impossible second, the entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing with me. Grandpa's eyes never left mine, but before I could form a single question, my stepmother's chair scraped backward with a sound sharp enough to cut glass. She forced a laugh that cracked halfway through. "Truth, Dad, you're confused. You shouldn't even be out of bed." She reached for his arm, trying to turn him toward the exit the way you'd steer a lost child. "Let's get you home before you say something you'll regret." Grandpa didn't budge. That was the moment they all realized the night had slipped out of their control, and panic rippled across the table like a wave. Dad cleared his throat, the same nervous habit he'd had since I was little whenever bills came due. "Emily, help your grandfather sit down. He's obviously not well." I stayed frozen. Something inside me already knew that once Grandpa sat, everything would change forever. And part of me still wanted to cling to the devil I knew. Joe recovered first, leaning back with the lazy smirk he used when he thought he'd spotted weakness. "Come on, Grandpa, don't tease her on her birthday." Emily's had enough disappointments for one lifetime. He turned to me, voice dripping honey and venom. "Isn't that right, sis?" "Speaking of disappointments, how's that divorce settlement treating you?" "Still paying alimony to the guy who ran off with the yoga instructor, classic Emily. Always giving away what little she has." My stepmother jumped in like they'd rehearsed it. "And poor Lauren, such a sweet girl, but community college. Really, Emily, your father and I offered to help with tuition and you refused. Pride is a luxury you can't afford, darling. At your age, most women have grandchildren climbing the family tree, not a daughter scraping by on student loans because mom couldn't keep a husband or a checking account." The words hit harder than any slap. Lauren was the one thing I'd done right. The one light in every dark year, and they were dragging her into this too. I felt the tears threaten hot and humiliating, and I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Dad joined in now, quieter but no kinder. Those IRS letters keep coming, don't they? You never did figure out what that was about. Thousands of dollars in back taxes, penalties piling up. We told you to let Joe handle it, but no, you had to do it yourself. Look where that got you. Joe raised an eyebrow, theatrical. Funny thing about those penalties. Turns out someone was very generous with your social security number. Hundreds of thousands flowing out over the years to a certain woman who never had to lift a finger. For nothing, Em. All for nothing. Imagine that. He let the last word linger, savoring it, and the meaning slice straight through me. A woman. Hundreds of thousands. My money, my name, my ruin, and they were laughing about it right here in front of the bread baskets and the candlelight. The room tilted. Nearby tables were starting to stare. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Phones lowered, but still recording. This wasn't just dinner anymore. This was a public execution, and I was the guest of honor. My stepmother leaned forward, voice syrupy with fake sympathy. We only say these things because we love you, honey. Someone has to be honest. 48 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A rented apartment with leaky faucets. A car that barely starts in winter. We're embarrassed for you, Emily. Embarrassed. The tears were winning now. I could feel them pooling, ready to spill, and I hated myself for it. I had spent my whole life swallowing their poison with a smile, telling myself that family meant enduring that love was silent and selfless. I had tiptoed around their egos, thanked them for every crumb, apologized for crimes I didn't commit, just to keep the peace. And here they were on my birthday, ripping me apart in front of strangers because I dared to survive without their approval. Joe lifted his glass again. To Emily Harper, ladies and gentlemen, may she finally learn that some people are just meant to be the cautionary tale. I couldn't breathe. The walls pressed in the chandelier lights blurred, and the sound of my own heartbeat roared in my ears. My hands shook so badly the water glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tablecloth, ice and water flooding across the white linen like blood from a fresh wound. That was when Grandpa, who had stood silent and motionless through every vicious word, brought his frail, liver-spotted hand down onto the table with a crack that silenced the entire room. Enough! The single word cracked through the restaurant like a gunshot. Glasses stopped clinking. A baby in the corner quit crying. Even the kitchen noise faded behind the swinging doors. Grandpa's hand stayed flat on the tablecloth, veins standing out like blue rivers under paper-thin skin, trembling not from weakness, but from pure, controlled fury. I had never heard him raise his voice. Not once. Not when Joe wrecked his brand-new truck at 17. Not when my stepmother sold Grandma's china to pay for a cruise. Not even the day they moved him into Sunny Acres against his will. Grandpa had always been the quiet harbor in every family storm. Yet here he was, 82 years old and shaking with rage on my behalf. My stepmother tried to laugh it off again, but it came out strangled. Dad, please, you're making a scene. Grandpa's eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter sky, swept across the three of them and settled on me. The anger softened into something gentler, something almost heartbroken. He drew a slow breath that seemed to pull all the oxygen from the room toward him. Emily, he said, and my name in his mouth sounded sacred, like a prayer he'd been carrying for decades. When you turned 18 the week after your high school graduation, I did what any grandfather who loved his only granddaughter would do. I went to the bank. I moved $5 million money I'd saved and invested since the day you were born into a trust fund with your name on it. Your name alone. It was meant to grow quietly until you needed it for college, for a home, for the life you deserved. $5 million. The number didn't fit inside my head. It floated there, absurd and impossible, like someone telling me the moon was made of wedding cake. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. My lungs had forgotten how to work. Grandpa kept talking, gentle but relentless. That was 30 years ago, Emily. 30 years. By now, with careful management, it should have been closer to 12 or 15 million. You were never supposed to worry about money. Not ever. I found my voice at last small and cracked. Grandpa, I never knew. There was never any trust fund. I would remember something like that. His gaze flicked to my parents and brother, and the temperature at the table seemed to drop 20 degrees. My father had gone the color of printer paper. His lips moved soundlessly as if he were trying to pray himself invisible. My stepmother's carefully made-up face had collapsed into something raw and terrified. The mascara she'd applied so perfectly was beginning to smear at the corners of her eyes. Joe, who could talk his way out of anything, suddenly discovered an urgent need to study the wine list upside down. His phone lay forgotten beside his plate screen, dark. I looked from one to the other, waiting for the denial, the joke, the explanation that would make this make sense. None came. The silence stretched thick and damning. Grandpa's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, yet every word landed like a hammer. I need absolute silence now. Not a word from any of you. Not one. My stepmother's mouth opened, then closed. Dad's hands curled into fists on the tablecloth, knuckles bone white. Joe finally met Grandpa's eyes and immediately looked away again, as if he'd stared into the sun. I couldn't feel my fingers. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the couple at the next table could hear it. $5 million. 30 years ago. A fortune that should have been mine, that could have paid for Lauren's college without loans, could have bought us a house with a yard and a dog, and a future without fear. Money that would have meant I never had to smile while they tore me apart year after year. And they had known. They had always known. Grandpa straightened as much as his crooked spine allowed. The fury was still there, but it was tempered now by a terrible, unbreakable resolve. He lifted the battered leather briefcase from where it rested against his leg and set it on the table with deliberate care, right in the middle of the puddle my spilled water had left. The brass latches glinted under the restaurant lights. He placed one trembling hand on top of the lid. Then, with a soft, decisive click that sounded louder than any thunder, Grandpa opened the leather briefcase. The latches snapped open with a sound like 2 small gunshots, and the lid of the briefcase rose slowly under Grandpa's steady hand. Inside were neat stacks of paper folders thick with colored tabs, and a heavy accordion file bound by rubber bands so old they had begun to crumble. He didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in the quiet of his nursing home room. Grandpa lifted the first folder and laid it open in front of me. The top page was a trust agreement dated the week I turned 18, my name typed in bold across the header. Emily Ann Harper, Revocable Trust. Beneath it, 30 years of monthly bank statements, each one clipped together with a paperclip gone orange from age. The opening balance was $5 million exactly. The ending balance on the final page was $312,047. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. My mouth went dry. Grandpa's finger moved down the columns like a teacher guiding a child through a lesson she should have learned long ago. Look here, he said quietly. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every fee. 30 years of it. He turned the page. A cascade of highlighted transactions spilled across the tablecloth, $42,000 to a private high school tuition account in Joe's name, $118,000 for a down payment on the lake house my parents claimed they bought with hard work, $67,000 labeled medical expenses the same year my stepmother got her first facelift. My signature appeared again and again at the bottom of authorization forms, perfect forgeries I had never seen, never signed. Another folder. Credit reports in my name stretching back 2 decades. Mortgages I never took out, credit cards maxed on European vacations, car loans for vehicles I had never driven. Each one stamped with the same looping imitation of my handwriting. My stepmother's manicured nails dug into the table's edge as Grandpa slid the pages closer to me. Then came the wire transfers. Dozens of them, all to the same offshore account. The amounts grew larger over time, climbing into the hundreds of thousands. Grandpa tapped the final column. $300,000 to a single recipient in the last 5 years alone, all under the guise of consulting fees or family support. All signed with your name, Emily. I couldn't speak. The room spun slowly like I was underwater. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Joe's jaw worked soundlessly the way it did when he was calculating how much trouble he was really in. Grandpa wasn't finished. He opened the accordion file and fanned out a final set of documents. Canceled checks, deposit slips, even a ledger handwritten in my stepmother's distinctive cursive. Every stolen dollar accounted for, cross-referenced, annotated in red ink. The total at the bottom of the last page was written in bold block letters: 4,999. 6 and 87 1 3. Less than $13 left of a fortune that should have been mine. The silence was suffocating. Somewhere a glass clinked, but it sounded miles away. My stepmother's breathing had gone shallow and fast like a trapped animal. Dad's hands trembled so badly his wedding ring rattled against the table. Joe finally looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my little brother's eyes. Grandpa closed the folders one by one, aligning the edges with care. "I have copies of everything," he said, voice calm but carrying to the farthest corner of the restaurant. Bank records, notary stamps, even the security footage from the branch where certain signatures were witnessed. "It's all here." He reached into the very bottom of the briefcase and drew out a thin manila envelope sealed with red wax. My name was written across the front in his careful, old-fashioned script. He set it on top of the mountain of evidence like a cherry on a poisoned sundae. Then as he shifted the envelope, something slipped free and fluttered down onto the white tablecloth between the wineglasses and the ruined salmon. A photograph. A color print recent of a woman in her late 40s standing on a porch somewhere sunny. Dark hair, pulled back, familiar eyes, the same slight tilt to the mouth I saw in the mirror every morning. She looked like me. She looked like family. A photo of the strange woman fell out from the dossier. The latches snapped open with a sound that cut straight through the frozen silence, and Grandpa lifted the lid as though he were unveiling a coffin. He didn't speak at first. He simply began to lay the papers out one stack after another in perfect rows across the white tablecloth, like a dealer laying down a hand no one could beat. 30 years of monthly bank statements, each bundle secured with a brittle rubber band. He started with the earliest and worked forward, his arthritic fingers surprisingly steady. The opening balance on the first page made my breath stop. $5,000 deposited the day I graduated high school. I had worn a borrowed cap and gown that afternoon, cried because my mother wasn't there to see it, and gone straight to my summer job at the public pool. No one had ever mentioned a trust fund. Not once. Grandpa's voice was low, almost conversational, but every word landed like a stone in still water. "Watch the balance, Emily. Watch it disappear." He flipped page after page. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. A steady hemorrhage. $50,000 gifts to my parents' joint checking account the same month they bought the new Cadillac. 90,000 to Joe's first LLC the year he claimed he was bootstrapping his real estate empire. A series of $18,000 charges labeled medical expenses in my name the same year my stepmother flew to Beverly Hills for what she called a wellness retreat. Another $42,000 for emergency dental reconstruction when Joe got his veneers. Fake medical debts. Fake emergencies. Fake everything, all bearing a signature that looked exactly like mine, but wasn't. The forgeries were flawless down to the little loop I put on my Ys. I felt the blood drain from my face as the numbers marched downward, relentless year after year, until the final statement showed $312.47 remaining. Less than I had in my purse right now. Grandpa opened a second folder and fanned out wire transfer confirmations, each one highlighted in yellow. Hundreds of transactions to the same offshore routing number. The largest recent ones were sickening: $87,000, $94,000. $112,000, and then circled in red a single transfer of $300,000, exactly 3 years ago. All of them authorized with my forged signature. All of them marked family support disbursement. My stepmother's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, red blooming across the carpet like blood. She didn't even notice. Grandpa wasn't finished. He set a thin photograph on top of the final wire confirmation. It slid from his fingers and settled face up between the salt shaker and my untouched salmon. A woman in her late 40s standing on a porch somewhere, warm sunlight catching in dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain white shirt, one hand raised to shield her eyes from the glare. The shape of her face, the slight tilt of her mouth, the way her eyebrows arched, it was like looking at a version of myself I'd never met. The resemblance was uncanny, almost disturbing. Grandpa's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, yet I heard every syllable as if he'd shouted it inside my skull. That woman, he said, tapping the photograph with one trembling finger, was paid to disappear. And she's family. The photo of the mystery woman lay face up on the table. The photograph lay between us like a living thing, and I couldn't look away from the woman who wore my face in a different life. My stepmother's breathing had turned ragged. Dad's forehead glistened with sudden sweat. Joe stared at the picture as if it might bite him. None of them spoke. The entire restaurant had gone unnaturally quiet, every nearby table pretending not to watch while watching with every cell in their bodies. Grandpa let the silence stretch until it hurt, then gently closed the manila envelope and set it aside. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost tender, the way it used to be when he tucked me in after nightmares. 18 months ago, he began. I started noticing things. Little things at first. A letter from the trust department forwarded to Sunny Acres because they still had me listed as trustee of record. A balance inquiry that showed almost nothing left. I thought it was a clerical error. Then another letter came and another. I was supposed to be losing my memory, Emily. They counted on that. But numbers I remember. Numbers don't lie. He reached into the breast pocket of his old suit and drew out a pair of reading glasses, the lenses thick and scratched. I hired people. Quietly. A retired detective from Columbus, a forensic accountant in Cincinnati, a young woman who specializes in digital trails. They cost me every penny of my own savings, but I needed to know exactly what had been done to my granddaughter. My throat closed. He had been fighting for me in the dark while I smiled and thanked them for birthday dinners. Grandpa opened another slim folder. Your signature, Emily, forged on loan applications for houses you never lived in. Cars you never drove, credit lines you never opened. Hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned off while your credit score was deliberately destroyed so you could never qualify for a mortgage or even a decent car loan. They made sure you stayed broke, stayed dependent, stayed controllable. Every time you got close to having something of your own, another unexpected expense appeared in your name. I felt the truth of it settle in my bones. The mysterious collection calls the denied apartment applications the way my credit card limits kept shrinking no matter how carefully I paid them down. I had blamed myself for years. Grandpa's eyes grew fierce behind the glasses. 3 times in the last decade, you were within weeks of foreclosure on credit card judgments you didn't know existed. 3 times I wired money anonymously through the investigators to bring the accounts current. Twice you were days away from bankruptcy filings that would have followed you for life. I stopped those too. You never knew because I didn't want you to carry the shame. But I was there, Emily. Every single time. I covered my mouth with both hands to keep the sob inside. He had been my silent guardian while I taught 3rd graders their multiplication tables and ate ramen so Lauren could have new shoes. Grandpa turned to Joe now and the gentleness vanished. And you? He said, voice cold enough to frost the wine glasses. You took it further. Offshore sports books, cryptocurrency scams, shell companies in Delaware and the Caymans. All registered using Emily's stolen identity. When your gambling debts climbed into the millions, you put her name on the collateral. Collection agencies in 3 states have her social security number memorized. Men who do not forgive debts have her address because of you. Joe's face had gone gray. He tried to speak, managed only a croak, then thought better of it. Grandpa reached into the inside pocket of the briefcase and withdrew a small black USB drive, no longer than my thumb. He held it up between 2 fingers so the overhead light caught the matte surface. Everything is on here, he said. Emails, recorded phone calls, ledger scans, the investigators' full reports. Dated, time-stamped, notarized. Enough to put people in federal prison for a very long time. He leaned forward, and with the same deliberate care he had used to open the briefcase, slid the drive across the damp tablecloth until it stopped an inch from my plate. Grandpa slides a USB drive across the table. The little black drive stopped right beside my fork, innocent as a mint after dinner. Grandpa's eyes never left mine as I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of every lie I'd ever swallowed. He nodded once the smallest motion and I understood. I reached for the butter knife, pried open my phone case, and slid the drive into the port I almost never used. My hands shook so badly the first attempt failed. On the second try, it clicked home. Grandpa had already cued the file, a single audio track titled Kitchen, 14 March last year. I pressed play and raised the volume just enough for our table to hear. The restaurant noise faded into a hush again, as though the whole room knew something sacred and terrible was coming. At first, there was only the low hum of a refrigerator and the clink of dishes being loaded into a dishwasher. Then my stepmother's voice, sharp and private, the tone she used when she thought no one of consequence was listening. Honestly, Richard, I don't know why you keep pretending to feel guilty. She's not even mine. She was never mine. Why should she get a dime of what's left? Let her stay the pathetic little schoolteacher. It keeps her tame. My father's voice, weaker, mumbled something I couldn't catch. My stepmother laughed, cold and triumphant. Poor, we made sure she stayed poor. That's the beauty of it. Every time she starts to get ahead, we just open another account in her name, run up another bill, and poof, she's back to scraping by. She'll never leave because she has nowhere to go. And Joe gets the rest when we're gone. That was always the plan. A pause, the sound of wine being poured. And don't start with the other one, she snapped. That little mistake is taken care of. 300,000 was cheap to make her vanish. She'll never know she has a sister, and the sister will never come looking. 2 birds, 1 very large stone. My father again, barely audible. But Dad's trust is gone, she cut in. And Dad's mind is going. By the time he figures it out, we'll have moved the last of it. He'll be dead soon anyway, and who's he going to tell the nurses who think he can't remember his own name? The recording ended as abruptly as it began. The kitchen hum cut to silence. I sat frozen, phone still in my hand, the screen gone dark. My stepmother's face had collapsed into something ugly and small. Dad looked 100 years old. Joe wouldn't lift his eyes from the tablecloth. I had always known on some level that they didn't love me. But hearing it laid bare like that, hearing the pleasure in her voice when she described keeping me poor, keeping me tame, was a different kind of wound. And then the casual mention of the other one my sister bought and paid for and erased like a line item on a budget. Grandpa reached across the table and gently took the phone from my numb fingers. He set it down, screen down like closing a casket. His voice when it came was soft as falling ash. It's time you met your real mother's memory. And the sister you never knew you had. The black USB drive slid to a stop against my cold fingertips, and the faint warmth of Grandpa's hand lingered on it like a promise. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, the tiny piece of plastic that apparently held the power to shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. My stepmother's eyes were fixed on it, too wide and glassy, with something that looked a lot like terror. Grandpa didn't wait for me to ask. He simply nodded toward my phone again, the same quiet nod he used to give when he wanted me to open a birthday present without tearing the paper. I turned the phone over, plugged the drive in, and opened the only file it contained. A single audio track time-stamped 14 months ago. I tapped play and turned the volume up just enough for our table. The first sound was the familiar creak of the kitchen cabinet in the house I grew up in, the one that always stuck unless you lifted the door a little. Then my stepmother's voice, low and vicious the way it got when she was absolutely certain no one who mattered was listening. She's not even mine, Richard. She never was. Why should she get a penny of what's left? All these years, I've smiled and played mother while that little brat walked around like a living memorial to your perfect dead wife. I earned every dollar we took, a soft clink of ice in a glass. My father's voice, barely audible, started to say something that sounded like my name. She cut him off. Don't you dare start. You're as weak now as you were then. And neither should that other little mistake, by the way. 1 was bad enough, but 2 no. The second one was handled quietly and permanently. Money well spent. She'll never know, and no one will ever come looking. Silence on the recording. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and my father's breathing, shallow and defeated, the same breathing I'd heard my entire life whenever he let her win. He didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He didn't even ask which other little mistake she meant. He simply let the words settle like dust. The track ended. My phone screen went dark. I felt the floor drop out from under me all over again, deeper this time. My stepmother wasn't just cruel. She had never seen me as human, only as an obstacle wearing the face of the woman my father had actually loved. And there had been another child, another daughter of his, erased the same way they had tried to erase me, except they succeeded with her. I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. At my stepmother, whose lipstick had begun to bleed at the corners of her mouth. At Joe, who suddenly seemed very interested in the ceiling. I had spent 48 years trying to earn love from people who had decided before I could walk that I didn't deserve it. I had smiled through every birthday dinner, every Christmas, every graduation, where they sighed about how I could have done better if I'd only tried harder. I had thanked them for crumbs while they stole the entire table. And somewhere out in the world was a half-sister who had been bought, sold, and vanished because her existence inconvenienced the woman sitting across from me, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Grandpa reached over and gently took the phone from my hand. He closed the audio app, removed the drive, and slipped it back into his pocket like a bullet he wasn't finished with yet. His gaze moved across the three of them, slow and deliberate, then settled on me with a tenderness that broke whatever was left of my heart. He leaned forward, voice soft enough that only our table could hear, but strong enough to change everything. It's time you met your real mother's memory. And the sister you never knew you had. The words left Grandpa's lips and settled over the table like the first snow of winter, soft, cold, and impossible to brush away. I felt them melt into me, into places I had kept numb for decades. My real mother's memory. A sister. The room around us had become background noise. Nothing existed except his voice, and the truth he had carried alone for far too long. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit and drew out a small, cracked leather wallet I remembered from my earliest childhood. Inside was a photograph I had not seen since I was tiny. My birth mother, young and laughing, sitting on the porch swing at the lake house, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. One hand resting protectively on a belly that must have been me. She was beautiful in the way sunlight on water is beautiful. Simple, radiant, gone too soon. She was 27 when the cancer took her, Grandpa said quietly. You were barely 4. You used to follow her everywhere, calling her Mommy Mine. When she died, your father fell apart. He couldn't look at you without seeing her, and the grief swallowed him whole. 3 months later, he brought home the woman sitting across from you now. She smiled at the funeral, Emily. I remember it like it was yesterday. She saw a grieving widower with a little girl who looked exactly like the wife he'd lost, and she decided she could replace one and erase the other. My stepmother flinched as if he'd struck her, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Grandpa's fingers trembled as he laid the photograph beside the picture of the mystery woman. Side by side, the resemblance was heartbreaking. Same eyes, same gentle curve of the mouth. 2 daughters, 2 different fates. 2 years after the wedding, he continued. Your father had a brief affair. Guilt. Loneliness, whiskey. I don't excuse it, but I understand it. The woman he was with got pregnant. When my daughter-in-law, your stepmother, found out, she saw another threat. Another child who might lay claim to the life she had married into. So she handled it the way she handles everything, with money and silence. She arranged a private adoption before the baby was even born. Paid the mother a fortune to disappear, forged the paperwork, pocketed support payments from your trust fund to cover it all. The child was handed off to a family in Arizona the day she was born. No records, no trail, no questions. Your father signed whatever was put in front of him because he was too ashamed to fight. I stared at the second photograph, at the sister I had never held, never rocked to sleep, never known existed. All those years I had longed for someone who shared my blood, someone who might understand the loneliness of growing up in that house. And she had been out there breathing the same air, looking up at the same sky while I smiled at Thanksgiving tables and pretended everything was fine. Grandpa's voice cracked for the first time. I fought to keep you with me after your mother died. I begged your father to let you live at the lake house away from her. He refused. Said a little girl needed a mother. I should have fought harder. I should have taken you and never looked back. But I was grieving too, and I thought blood should stay with blood. By the time I realized what she was capable of, the damage was done. And the second child, I didn't even know she existed until the investigators started digging. She was erased so cleanly, even I couldn't find her for 45 years. He looked at me, then eyes shining with tears he refused to let fall. I failed you both, but I won't fail you again. The weight of it settled over me like a blanket woven from every lonely night, every forced smile, every time I told myself their coldness was somehow my fault. My birth mother hadn't lived to protect me. My father hadn't had the strength. But Grandpa had never stopped trying, even when it cost him everything. My stepmother finally found her voice thin and poisonous. You can't prove any of this. It's ancient history. Grandpa turned to her and the gentleness vanished. Oh, I can prove it, he said. And that's exactly why they stole 30 years of your life. The air in the restaurant had grown so thick I could barely draw breath. Grandpa's last sentence hung there raw and final, and for a moment no one moved. My stepmother's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning on dry land. My father stared at the tablecloth as if it might swallow him whole. Joe looked like he was calculating how fast he could sprint for the door. Grandpa wasn't finished. He reached into the briefcase one more time and pulled out a single legal-sized envelope sealed with red wax. The wax bore the imprint of the old family ring he had worn every day of my childhood. He held it up so the light caught the seal, then turned it over so I could read my name written across the front in my father's shaky handwriting. 6 years ago, Grandpa said, voice steady again, your father almost died. Heart attack. 3 days in intensive care. While he lay there with tubes in his arms and machines breathing for him, he did the first brave thing he'd done in decades. He called his lawyer to the hospital and rewrote his will. Everything house investments, life insurance, the offshore accounts he still controlled, he left to you, Emily. Not a cent to Joe. Not a dime to the woman who had spent 30 years bleeding him dry. He told the lawyer it was the only way he could think to make amends for letting you suffer. My father made a sound low in his throat, half sob, half groan. My stepmother went rigid. Grandpa continued. The lawyer drew it up that night. Your father signed it in front of 2 nurses and a notary. Witnesses. Hospital security footage. Ironclad. Then he handed the only original to me and begged me to keep it safe until the day came when you needed it most. He knew what she would do if she found it. He turned the envelope slowly in his hands. She did find it. 3 weeks later, when your father was home recovering, she went through his desk. She tore the hospital copy to shreds and burned the pieces in the backyard fire pit. Then she drove to the lawyer's office with a new will, one she had typed herself, and told him if he didn't witness your father's new signature, she would ruin him. Tell his wife about the affair he'd had 10 years earlier. Leak client information, hire someone to plant drugs in his car. Whatever it took. The man was terrified. He signed, moved his practice to Florida the next month, and never looked back. I couldn't feel my legs. My father had tried to fix things. Once. In secret. And she had buried it the way she buried everything that threatened her control. Grandpa looked at my father now, and there was no anger left, only sorrow. You let her do it, Richard. You sat in that hospital bed and promised your daughter a future, then came home and let the promise die, because you were too afraid to stand up one more time. Dad's shoulders folded inward. Tears ran down his cheeks and dripped onto his untouched pasta. He didn't deny it. Grandpa's fingers tightened on the envelope. I kept the real one hidden all these years. In a safe deposit box under a name she would never think to look for. I updated the witnesses every year, had it re-notarized, made sure it would hold up no matter how long I had to wait. Tonight is the night. My stepmother lunged forward, claws out. That's a forgery, you senile old man, you can't. Grandpa didn't flinch. He broke the wax seal with his thumb, pulled out the thick sheaf of pages, and with one deliberate motion threw the authentic will onto the table. It landed with a soft final thud right on top of the forged signatures and the ruined trust statements, the hospital notary seal gleaming under the restaurant lights. Grandpa throws the authentic will onto the table. The authentic will lay there like a guillotine blade, its hospital blue cover stark against the white tablecloth. The notary seal caught the light and threw it back like a warning. My stepmother stared at it as if it might explode, and for the first time in my life, Joe looked small, folded in on himself, the cocky grin wiped clean. Grandpa didn't give them time to recover. He reached into the briefcase once more and produced a thin red folder stamped confidential in black block letters. When he opened it, a stack of photographs spilled out Joe at casino tables in Las Vegas. Joe shaking hands with men in expensive suits outside private jets. Joe signing documents in dimly lit back rooms. Beside each photo was a corresponding financial statement, balances in the negative millions, red ink everywhere. Joseph has been playing a very dangerous game, Grandpa said, voice low enough that nearby tables had to lean in to hear. Sports betting syndicates in 3 states. Cryptocurrency, pump and dumps, real estate fraud with shell companies registered in the Caymans. All of it collapsing at once. The people he owes do not send polite letters, Emily. They send enforcers. Joe tried to laugh, but it came out strangled. You don't know what you're talking about, old man. Grandpa ignored him and slid one particular document across to me. It was a promissory note for $2.8 million. Collateral listed as full personal guarantee under 2 names. Emily, Ann Harper, and a second name I had never seen before. The same name that had appeared on the $300,000 wire transfer, my half-sister's name. Joe had pledged both of us 2 women who had never even met as insurance for debts we didn't know existed. My stomach lurched. You used her too. Joe's face twisted. I was going to pay it back before anyone noticed. Grandpa finished. You sold the lake house 6 months ago, Joseph. Signed the deed over to a man named Viktor Kasparov as partial repayment. The same man who now holds markers on the rest of what you owe. The same man whose people have been leaving messages on Emily's phone for weeks, messages she thought were wrong numbers. The lake house. My mother's laugh echoing off the water. Grandpa teaching me to skip stones, the swing on the porch where I used to fall asleep against her shoulder. Gone. Sold like an old couch because my brother couldn't stop rolling dice. I looked at Joe and saw him clearly for the first time. Not the golden boy, not the success story. Just a terrified addict who had gambled away 3 generations of security and used his own family as chips. Grandpa closed the red folder and leaned in so close I could smell the faint medicinal scent of the nursing home on his collar. They know about tonight, he whispered, eyes flicking toward the restaurant entrance. They followed me from Sunny Acres. 2 cars. They're waiting to see if Joe leaves with enough cash to buy another week of breathing. The blood drained from Joe's face. My stepmother made a small animal sound. Dad just closed his eyes. Grandpa's hand found mine under the table and squeezed once hard. They're coming here. Tonight. The words left Grandpa's mouth in a whisper so low I felt them more than heard them, and every drop of blood in my body turned to ice. Coming here. Tonight. The restaurant lights suddenly felt too bright, the exits too far away. Joe's face had gone the color of spoiled milk. He kept glancing toward the front, as if expecting men with guns to appear between the bread baskets. Grandpa wasn't looking at the door yet. He was looking at me, and in his eyes I saw something gentler than fear. He reached into the briefcase one last time and drew out a small, tarnished brass key on a faded blue ribbon. I knew that key before he even placed it in my palm. I had worn it around my neck when I was 5 years old, back when the lake house still belonged to us. You need to understand what they took from you, he said softly. Not just money. Not just time. They took the last place on earth your mother was truly happy. I closed my fingers around the key and felt the memories flood back so vividly I could smell the pine in the water. The lake house had been my sacred ground. The screened porch where Mommy read me Winnie the Pooh while fireflies blinked outside. The dock where she taught me to float on my back and look for shapes in the clouds. The bedroom with the slanted ceiling where she sang me to sleep the summer the cancer came back for the final time. After she died, Grandpa brought me there every weekend until I was 10, letting me fall asleep to the sound of waves lapping the shore so I could dream she was still singing. It was the only place I ever felt her arms around me after she was gone. Then one winter they told me a hurricane had torn through and destroyed it. I was 12. I cried for weeks. My stepmother showed me grainy newspaper photos of downed trees and said the insurance money barely covered demolition. I believed her because children believe what adults tell them, especially when the adults are the only family they have left. I mourned that house like a person. Every birthday I lit a candle and wished I could sit on that porch just one more time. Grandpa's hand covered mine warm and steady. It was never destroyed, Emily. Not by any storm. They sold it 6 months ago to pay the first wave of Joe's markers, signed the deed over in the middle of the night and told the buyer to keep quiet until the transfer was final. But before they emptied it, I sent someone in. A trusted friend. He found what they tried to throw away. He reached into the briefcase and carefully lifted out a small wooden box. No bigger than a shoebox, the lid carved with tiny daisies, my mother's favorite flower. My breath caught. I had painted those daisies with her the summer I was 7. Grandpa opened the lid and the scent of cedar and old paper drifted up like a ghost. Inside were 3 leather-bound diaries' edges, worn soft pages filled with my mother's handwriting. And beneath them a stack of photographs I had never seen my mother very pregnant smiling at someone behind the camera. My mother holding a newborn wrapped in the same pink blanket I still had in a box under my bed. My mother writing in one of the diaries while the baby slept on her chest. The baby had my eyes, my half-sister. My stepmother had wanted every trace of her erased, just like she had wanted every trace of my mother erased. But my real mother had hidden the truth in the one place she knew I would someday return to if I ever found my way home. I pressed the box to my heart and felt the tears come. Not the humiliated tears of earlier, but something deeper. Something that tasted like healing. Grandpa's gaze shifted past my shoulder toward the entrance. His grip tightened on my hand. They just walked in. The restaurant door had barely closed behind them when 2 men in tailored dark suits began moving between the tables with the quiet certainty of sharks cutting through shallow water. They didn't raise their voices, didn't push anyone aside. They simply walked as if the room already belonged to them. One was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and a smile that never reached his eyes. The other was shorter, compact, a scar running pale across his throat like someone had once tried to end a conversation permanently. They stopped at the edge of our booth and looked down at Joe the way butchers look at meat. The taller one spoke first, voice cultured, almost pleasant. Mr. Harper. 2.8 million plus interest due tonight. We were told you'd have arrangements. His gaze slid across the table, taking in the scattered documents, the wooden box, the will. Looks like family therapy ran long. Joe tried to stand and couldn't. His legs wouldn't hold him. My stepmother clutched my father's arm hard enough to leave bruises. Emily, she hissed, panic cracking her voice wide open. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them you'll cover Joseph. You always cover for family. My father found his voice at last thin and trembling. Please, honey, just sign whatever they need. We'll figure it out later. You don't want these men angry. They were both looking at me now, the woman who had spent 48 years saying yes when I wanted to scream no, the woman who had apologized for existing in rooms they filled with contempt. They expected the same Emily who had smiled through every insult tonight, who had paid for dinners she couldn't afford just to keep the peace. But something inside me had broken wide open when I held my mother's diaries, and what poured out wasn't fear anymore. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood. The taller man tilted his head amused. Miss Harper, I presume your brother was very generous with your good name. I looked him straight in the eye and my voice came out steady, stronger than it had ever been in my life. I know about my sister. The one you people helped erase. I know about every forged signature, every dollar you chased that was never his to gamble. And I'm done paying for your crimes. My stepmother gasped. Emily. Joe tried to grab my wrist. Sit down, you idiot. I pulled free without looking at him. No. The shorter man shifted his weight, the smile fading. We're not here for conversation, Miss Harper. We're here for payment. One way or another. I felt Grandpa rise beside me, slow but unafraid, his hand finding my shoulder. The room had gone completely still. Even the waitstaff stood frozen near the kitchen doors. Phones were out now, recording everything. I drew a breath that tasted like lake water and pine and every summer I was supposed to have. Not this time, I said loud enough for every camera to hear. Never again. The words left my mouth and hung in the air like a line drawn in steel. The two creditors hesitated, the taller one's smile faltering for the first time. Around us, the restaurant had become a frozen tableau. Phones raised, waiters rooted in place, every eye locked on our corner booth. Joe slumped lower in his seat. My stepmother's face a mask of pure terror, my father openly weeping. And I stood taller than I ever had in my life. Grandpa's hand warm on my shoulder, the weight of 48 years of silence finally lifting. That was when the front door opened again. This time it wasn't menace that walked in. It was rescue. A silver-haired man in a navy suit entered with the calm authority of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Behind him followed two uniformed officers and a younger woman carrying a leather portfolio. The man approached our table, directly nodded once to Grandpa, and placed a thick document case on the table, with the soft finality of a judge's gavel. Miss Harper, he said, voice carrying easily over the hush. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I've been your grandfather's attorney for 30 years. He instructed me to wait across the street until you said the words we just heard on every phone in this room. Grandpa's eyes shone with something that looked very much like pride. I knew you'd find your voice tonight, Emily. I just wanted to be sure you had something worth saying it for. He gestured to the case. When I created the first trust, the one they stole, I knew there was a chance it might not be enough protection. So I created a second one. Completely separate. Different bank, different trustees, different everything. No one in this family ever knew it existed. Not your father, not your stepmother, not even the investigators I hired last year. Only Mr. Whitmore and I held the keys. Mr. Whitmore opened the case and lifted out a single folder bound in dark green leather. Inside were statements that made my knees weak. Quarterly reports, investment summaries, growth charts that climbed steadily upward like a heartbeat getting stronger. The final balance page showed $9,264,118.42 as of this morning. Grandpa continued softer now. Every dividend, every stock split, every conservative investment I made with the money I kept back from the first trust went into this one. It was never meant to replace what was stolen. It was meant to make sure that no matter what they did, you would never be powerless again. I couldn't speak. $9 million. A fortune built in secret while I clipped coupons and worked second jobs at Christmas to buy Lauren new boots. But Grandpa wasn't finished. Mr. Whitmore produced a second, thinner folder. This contains something even more precious, he said. Full legal funding and irrevocable rights to locate and contact your half-sister. We found her 6 months ago. She's 45, married with 2 children of her own. She lives in Tucson under the name she was given at birth. She knows about you now, Emily. She's been waiting for you to be ready. The room spun gently. A sister. Waiting. Mr. Whitmore placed both folders side by side, then drew out a final set of documents. Transfer papers. Signature pages, powers of attorney already prepared. Everything becomes yours tonight, he said. Effective the moment you sign. The money, the rights, the future. All of it. The officers moved forward quietly, positioning themselves between our table and the two creditors who had gone very still. The taller one opened his mouth, thought better of it, and took one step back. Grandpa squeezed my shoulder once gently. This one they can't touch, Emily. This one is yours by blood and by law and by every promise I never got to keep until now. Mr. Whitmore uncapped a pen and laid it on top of the documents. Then, with the same deliberate care Grandpa had shown all night, the lawyer slid the ownership papers in front of her. The ownership papers stopped an inch from my plate, the pen resting on top like an invitation I had waited 48 years to receive. I stared at the blank signature line beside my printed name, and for one heartbeat, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath with me. Then the front door opened again. This time it was 4 uniformed officers and 2 plainclothes detectives moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this many times before. The lead detective, a woman with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun, walked straight to our table and placed a hand on Grandpa's shoulder. He nodded once, the smallest motion, and I understood he had called them hours ago before he ever left Sunny Acres, timing everything down to the minute. Joseph Harper, the first officer announced, voice ringing clear through the restaurant. You're under arrest for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft racketeering, and conspiracy to commit same. He stepped forward, cuffs already out. Joe tried to stand, stumbled, and the officer caught him by the elbow with practiced ease. The metal clicked shut around his wrists before he could form a protest. You have the right to remain silent. Joe's face crumpled. The golden boy, the one who always had a story, a smile a way out, finally had nothing left. The officer guided him past the tables while every phone in the place followed him like searchlights. The second officer turned to my stepmother. She was already on her feet, backing away, eyes wild. No, she hissed, you can't. I'm the victim here. The officer didn't argue. He simply took her arm, turned her around, and cuffed her with the same calm precision. Ma'am, you're under arrest for forgery of a legal document, theft by deception, and willful tampering with a last will and testament. Anything you say? She shrieked something about lawyers and connections, and how dare they? But the words dissolved into the restaurant's stunned silence as they led her away. Her perfect hair had come loose, mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint running in the rain. My father stayed seated. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He simply folded forward until his forehead rested on the tablecloth's shoulders, shaking with sobs that sounded like they came from the bottom of 40 years of cowardice. I watched the man who had once carried me on his shoulders collapse under the weight of finally seeing the monster he had married, the monster he had fed with his silence. Grandpa's hand found mine again, warm and steady. The detectives were already gathering the documents, sliding everything into evidence bags with careful labels. One of them photographed the table from every angle. Another spoke quietly into a radio about additional units en route for the 2 creditors who had melted back toward the bar the moment uniforms appeared. The lead detective stepped in front of me, expression professional, but not unkind. She waited until I met her eyes. Ma'am, she said clearly, making sure every recording phone caught it. Do you wish to press full charges? The detective's question hung in the sudden quiet of the restaurant. Every phone still pointed at me like I was the final act of a play no one had expected to see. I could feel the weight of their lenses, the weight of 48 years of swallowed words, the weight of the pen still waiting beside the ownership papers that would make me wealthier than I had ever dreamed. And yet none of it mattered as much as the answer I was about to give. I looked first at Joe, cuffed and pale between 2 officers, the brother who had once stolen my Halloween candy, and now had stolen my future. Then at my stepmother, mascara streaked and snarling, the woman who had smiled at my mother's funeral and spent 3 decades making sure I never forgot I was the leftover child. Finally at my father, bent over the table, sobbing like the broken man he had always been beneath the expensive suits. I drew a slow breath and met the detective's steady gaze. I will press charges, I said, and my voice didn't shake. But I want justice, not vengeance. Civil recovery of every dollar that was taken from the trust funds and the will, plus interest, plus whatever the courts decide is fair for pain and suffering. Criminal charges, yes, but I'll ask the prosecutor to consider reduced sentences if they cooperate fully and repay what they stole. Prison should protect society, not feed my anger. I've carried enough of that for one lifetime. A ripple went through the room, soft gasps and murmured approval. My stepmother screamed something incoherent about betrayal, but the officers were already leading her away. Joe just stared at the floor. I turned to my father. He lifted his head, eyes red and pleading the way they had been when I was 8, and begged him to make her stop calling me names. This time, I was the one with the power to speak. I forgive you, I said quietly. I forgive the weakness, the silence, the years you let her hurt me because it was easier than fighting. But forgiveness doesn't mean I keep the door open. You chose her over me every single day. That choice has consequences. I love you, Dad. I always will. But I won't let you near my life or Lauren's or my sister's ever again. He nodded, tears streaming, and didn't try to argue. Some part of him had been waiting for this moment too. I looked at Grandpa, then at Mr. Whitmore, at the officers waiting patiently. There's one more thing, I said louder now, so every recording would catch it. With the money from the second trust, I'm starting a foundation tonight. For women who have been financially abused by the people who are supposed to love them. Legal help, emergency grants, safe places to rebuild. It will be called the Harper Sisters Fund, because no woman should ever have to choose between poverty and poison again. The detective smiled just a little. We'll make sure the paperwork reflects all of that, ma'am. I signed the ownership papers, then my hands steadied the pen moving across the line as if it had always known the way home. When I looked up, Grandpa was watching me with tears shining in his pale blue eyes. But his smile was the same one from the photographs on the lake house porch, young and proud, and utterly unafraid. He reached across the table and covered my hand with both of his. One last surprise, he said, voice thick with everything we had survived tonight about the lake house. The words settled between us like the last note of a song I had waited my whole life to hear. Grandpa's eyes were bright with tears, but his smile was steady, the same smile that had greeted me on that porch every summer when the world still made sense. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a new set of keys, attached to the same faded blue ribbon I had worn around my neck when I was 5. I bought it back 4 months ago, he said softly. Paid cash through a trust no one knew about. The buyer was happy to sell once he understood what the house really meant. I've had people working night and day ever since new roof, fresh paint, the exact shade of robin's egg blue. Your mother loved the swing on the porch rebuilt plank by plank. Even the daisies along the walkway are the same variety she planted the year you learned to walk. It's waiting for you, Emily. Exactly as it was. I couldn't speak. The keys were warm from his hand, and I closed my fingers around them like they might vanish if I let go. Grandpa picked up the cedar box that held my mother's diaries. He opened the last one, the one with the cracked spine, and turned to a page marked with a pressed daisy. There's something else you need to read, he whispered. Something she wrote the week before she went into the hospital for the final time. I took the book with shaking hands. The ink had faded to soft brown, but her handwriting was still clear, looping, and graceful. If I don't make it home, tell my girls I loved them both the same. Tell Emily her little sister came from the purest kind of love, the kind that happens when two broken hearts find comfort for one night. Tell them their grandfather is the bravest man I ever knew, because he promised to protect them both, even if it meant carrying the secret forever. He is her father too, though no one will ever say it aloud. Some truths are safer kept quiet so love can grow in peace. I looked up at Grandpa through a blur of tears. He nodded once, eyes shining. I loved your mother with everything I had, he said, voice rough. After she was gone, I made a promise on her grave that both her daughters would be safe. When the second baby came, I knew the truth would only bring more pain. So I let the world believe what it needed to believe, and I loved her from a distance the only way I could, by making sure she had a good life and by saving everything else for you. He had carried that secret for 45 years. 2 daughters, 1 grief, 1 lifetime of quiet protection. 6 weeks later, we all stood on the porch together, me at 48, Lauren at 23, Grandpa at 82, leaning on his cane but taller than he'd been in years, and my half-sister Clara, who had flown in from Tucson the moment she heard my voice on the phone. She was 45 with my mother's eyes and Grandpa's stubborn chin, and when she hugged me for the first time, the lake breeze carried the scent of pine and second chances. We moved in that same afternoon. Lauren claimed the attic room with the slanted ceiling. Clara's teenage sons ran wild along the shoreline, shouting with joy they had never been allowed to feel before. Grandpa sat in the old rocking chair and watched the water the way he used to watch me, peaceful at last. And every morning, I walk out onto the porch with my coffee, open my laptop, and run the Harper Sisters Fund from the swing my mother loved. Applications pour in from women across the country who have been bled dry by the people who are supposed to love them most. We help them stand up the same way I finally stood up that night in the restaurant. The sun sets red and gold across the water, the same colors it painted the night I learned I wasn't broken after all. For the first time in 30 years, Emily finally felt home. If you've been holding your breath through every twist, every betrayal, and every tear this story dragged out of you, then you already know this one hit different. A 48-year-old woman who spent her whole life being told she was nothing discovers in one single dinner that she was actually owed everything, and then takes it back with grace fire and the kind of justice we all secretly cheer for. From the forged trust fund to the secret sister from the lake house that came home to the grandfather who carried 2 daughters in his heart for 45 years. This is the revenge and redemption story we wait our whole lives to hear. And now it's your turn. Drop a comment right now and tell me which moment broke you the most. Was it the audio of the stepmother admitting she kept Emily poor on purpose, the photograph of the sister she never knew? Or was it Emily finally standing up and saying, "Not this time"? Never again. I read every single comment, and the ones that make me cry or fist pump the hardest get pinned and hearted. If this story lit something up inside you the way it did me, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because every week I bring you real-life family drama that ends with the good ones winning. We've got hundreds of stories just like this waiting, and the next one might be the one that feels like it was written for you. Like the video, if you believe family isn't always the people who hurt you, it's the people who show up to hand you back your life. Share it with that friend who needs to remember she's worth fighting for. Thank you for crying with me, cheering with me, and staying until the very last second. See you in the next one, because every underdog deserves her day, and we're just getting started.